And someone who lost his wallet. That was all he said. A homeless young man, starving, shaking, shoes falling apart, placed over $5,000 cash into the hands of a Hell's Angel. Every single dollar still there. The entire diner froze. And Marcus Callahan, a man who had made grown men flinch with a single look, stared at this kid who had nothing and gave back everything. And he asked the question nobody in that room could answer. Son, do you even understand who you just returned this to? If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. You may want to see how far this story travels. And see, the morning Ethan Brooks found the wallet, he had exactly 43 cents in his pocket, a tear in his left shoe, wide enough to let the cold air reach his ankle. And a hunger so deep it had stopped feeling like pain and started feeling like part of who he was. He had been moving through the parking lot behind the old Meridian warehouse for about 20 minutes, not looking for trouble, and not looking for anything that belonged to someone else, and just scanning the cracked asphalt with the particular kind of attention that homeless people develop after months of learning that survival sometimes hides in the spaces other people walk past without noticing. He dropped transit card, a forgotten umbrella still in good condition, paper bag from a restaurant that someone had left mostly uneaten. These were not humiliations to Ethan anymore. They were just reality. And he had made a kind of peace with reality. What he had not made peace with was the cold. In November in the city had arrived early and mean that year. And the kind of cold that didn't just touch the skin but pressed through it, working its way into muscles and bones and the back of the throat. Ethan's jacket was a gray zip-up he had found outside a Goodwill donation bin 3 weeks earlier, slightly too small across the shoulders and missing its bottom zipper pull. Held together through the last few inches with a safety pin he'd been guarding like it was currency. In a way, it was. He had been sleeping the last 4 nights in the stairwell of a parking structure 6 blocks north, sharing the space with 2 other men. He barely knew a soft-spoken veteran named Dennis, who never talked about the war, but sometimes cried quietly in the middle of the night, and a younger man named Ray, who had a drug problem he was trying to fight, and a sister somewhere in Phoenix who didn't know where he was. And the 3 of them had developed a wordless agreement, and you kept to your corner, and you didn't touch anything that wasn't yours, and you didn't ask questions that would force someone to lie to your face. It was a fragile system, but it worked. Ethan had woken up at 5 that morning because a delivery truck 2 floors below was backing up with that electronic beeping alarm that drilled through concrete and thin jackets and whatever brief unconscious any rest a body could find on a folded piece of cardboard. He had lain still for a moment, listening to his own stomach. And he had gotten up, folded his cardboard neatly against the wall, an instinct toward order that he couldn't explain and hadn't bothered to, and walked out into the dark. And the Meridian parking lot was about 2 blocks east of where he usually moved. He avoided it for a while because there were often motorcycles parked back there. Big machines that belonged to people who paid attention to what was near their property. And that morning, and maybe because of the cold, maybe because he'd already covered every other patch of ground in a 4-block radius and found nothing useful, he turned that direction anyway. He almost missed it. The wallet was lying on the ground beside the rear wheel of a motorcycle so large and dark it seemed to absorb the early morning light around it. It was a worn leather billfold, in dark brown, and the edges rubbed pale, and with a custom silver clasp on the front that caught what little light there was. It had slipped from the seat, or a saddlebag, or a pocket, and it lay there in the cold like it was just waiting. Ethan stopped. He looked at the wallet. Then he looked around the parking lot. Nobody. And three other motorcycles parked in a row, and two pickup trucks near the far end. A dumpster, a chain link fence, a strip of dead grass along the base of the warehouse wall. And the only sound was a bus somewhere on the street behind him and the distant mechanical rhythm of the city waking up. He crouched down and picked up the wallet. He almost didn't open it. And he almost set it on the seat of the motorcycle and walked away. He told himself later that what stopped him was practical. He needed to find some kind of identification inside, a name or address, something he could use to return it properly. So he opened it. The cash hit him first. And not because he counted it immediately, but because of the way it looked, a thick fold of bills, a mixture of hundreds and fifties, pressed together with a silver money clip embedded in the billfold's center pocket. And is more money than Ethan had held in his hands in years. And more money than he had seen in one place in longer than he could clearly remember. His hands did not shake. That surprised him later, when he thought about it. He expected his body to react before his mind could catch up. But he just stood there, very still, and looked at the money. Counted it. $5,340. And there were also 3 credit cards, 2 Visa, 1 MasterCard, all in the same name. A Nevada driver's license. A worn photograph of a woman and 2 teenage girls, the kind of photo that gets carried in a wallet for years until the edges go soft. A handwritten note folded small, the words too personal to read, and a membership card from an organization whose symbol Ethan recognized even before he processed the name printed above it. He had seen that symbol before. Everyone had. The winged death's head. And the words in an arc above it. Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club. Name on the driver's license was Marcus Callahan. Ethan stood in the cold parking lot and held $5,340 in his hands and thought about what that money could do. He thought about a motel room, a real bed, heat you could control with a dial on the wall, a shower with hot water that ran as long as you needed it to. And he thought about food, not just any food, but the particular foods he had been quietly craving for months. A real breakfast, eggs over easy, toast with butter, and coffee that wasn't from a shelter urn that had been sitting since 5 in the morning. He thought about a pair of shoes without a hole in them. And he thought about the particular dignity of walking down a street and not feeling like you needed to be invisible. He thought about all of it, and then he thought about the photograph. And 2 teenage girls and a woman. The photograph of somebody's family carried close enough to be in a wallet. And he thought about the handwritten note, which he had not read and didn't intend to. And he thought about a rule he had made for himself sometime in the first weeks after. He had lost everything, a rule that he had held on to not because he expected anyone to notice or reward him for it, but because he had understood in the particular clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, that it was the only thing he could still be sure of. Only part of himself that circumstances could not take from him unless he handed it over willingly. He would not take something that did not belong to him. Not because he was afraid, not because someone was watching. These are the answer he wanted to give when someone asked him, in 10 years or 20 years or at the end of his life, what kind of person he had been. He put the money back. He closed the wallet. He stood there for a moment longer, just breathing, letting the weight of the decision settle. And he started walking toward the sound of voices. He found them 3.5 blocks away in a diner called Eddie's that had been serving breakfast to the neighborhood since before Ethan was born. And the place was warm. He could feel the warmth from outside through the glass door, and for a second he almost stopped walking. And walking into Eddie's meant walking into a room full of people who would immediately see him for what he was: the jacket, the shoes, any the particular look that comes from sleeping outdoors. And he had learned by now how such rooms changed when someone like him walked through the door. But he had a wallet that belonged to someone inside. Pushed the door open. The diner was maybe two-thirds full. In the morning crowd, counter seats taken by regulars with coffee and newspapers. In few booths along the window. And in the back half of the room, occupying 3 large tables pushed together, a group of men in leather vests that carried the same symbol Ethan had seen on the membership card. 5 of them, maybe 13. Big men, most of them, with the particular relaxed confidence of people who move through the world, knowing that most other people moved around them. They were eating, drinking coffee, talking, with the easy familiarity of a group that had known each other a long time. Some of them had already noticed Ethan come through the door. The conversation at the back tables didn't stop. Exactly, but it shifted. In that particular frequency of attention that happens in rooms where people are attuned to changes in their environment. So, Ethan walked to the counter first. And the woman working the register, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, named he saw from her name tag Linda, looked at him with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had been working a public-facing job long enough to have seen everything. "You need to write something to someone at the back tables," Ethan said. "Can you tell me which one is Marcus Callahan?" Linda's expression changed slightly. "You sure about that?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment, the way people look at someone they're trying to read. And then she nodded slowly toward the back, far table. "The one at the head, dark hair, gray at the temples." Ethan thanked her and turned around. The walk to the back of that diner was one of the longest walks of his life, and it was maybe 40 feet. He could feel every set of eyes in the room finding him. Not hostile, exactly, just present. The way a group of people who have trained themselves to be aware of their surroundings become aware all at once. One by one, conversation at the back tables was suspending itself without anyone saying stop. And Marcus Callahan was exactly where Linda had indicated. He was somewhere in his late 50s, with wide shoulders and hands that looked like they had spent decades working on machinery. His hair was dark with gray at the temples and cut short. And he wore a leather vest over a long-sleeved thermal shirt. And he had the kind of face that had been weathered not just by sun and wind, but by the particular texture of a life that had not always been easy. He was looking at Ethan before Ethan reached the table. Not suspicious, just watching. Ethan stopped at the edge of the table. The entire room had gone quiet now, even the counter seats, even Linda behind her register. He held out the wallet. "I found this in the parking lot behind the Meridian warehouse," Ethan said. "I believe it belongs to you." Marcus Callahan did not move for a moment. Then he reached out and took the wallet. He opened it. He did not rush. He looked at the cash, the cards, the license. His hands were absolutely steady. Then he looked up at Ethan. "How much is in here?" Marcus said. His voice was low and threatening, just level, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud. $5,340, Ethan said. Didn't count it more than once, so the number might be off by a few dollars, but I believe that's right. And the cards are all there. The photograph, everything that was in it when I found it. And Marcus looked at him for a long time. Then he reached into the wallet and counted the cash himself. Slowly, bill by bill, laying them on the table in front of him. And the table was silent, everyone watching. When he finished counting, he looked up again. "How long ago did you find it?" "Maybe 40 minutes. "And you walked here?" "Yes, sir. You walked 40 minutes in the cold to return this." Ethan didn't answer that. It hadn't felt like a question. Marcus looked at the wallet. Then he looked at Ethan's jacket, his shoes, the backpack with the tape holding it together. And the way Ethan held himself straight, careful, not asking for anything. And sit down, Marcus said. Ethan didn't move. Sit down, Marcus said again. Not louder, just more definite. Ethan sat down. Marcus gestured to the man nearest him, who immediately flagged down the server. Give him whatever he wants. Then he turned back to Ethan and folded his hands on the table. I want you to tell me your name, and then I want you to tell me everything. My name is Ethan Brooks. How old are you, Ethan? I'm 24. Marcus nodded once, like that answered a question he hadn't asked out loud. And all right, tell me everything, Ethan told him. Not the way people sometimes tell their stories to strangers, compressing the pain, softening the edges, shaping the narrative towards something more palatable. Told it straight. He told it the way it actually was, because something about the way Marcus Callahan listened made lying seem both unnecessary and impossible. He had grown up in Clearfield, a mid-sized town about 80 miles north of the city. And his mother had worked as a medical billing specialist. His father had driven long-haul freight. Neither of them had gone to college, but they had believed in it with the particular intensity of people who understood from experience what its absence cost. NEPD isusti ibid. When Ethan had been accepted engineering program at the state university on a partial scholarship, his grades had been the thing in high school that nothing else could touch, and the one place where the math and the physics and the intuitive sense of how systems worked together into something undeniable. They had been the ones who insisted he go even when the money didn't fully work. He'd made it through 2 years of engineering courses that he genuinely loved, that felt less like studying and more like learning the language of the physical world was written in. 2 years of partial scholarship and part-time work at a campus automotive center and careful management of money that never quite added up, no matter how carefully he managed it. His father had the accident, a jackknifed semi on a highway in Nebraska. His father had survived, and the injuries were serious enough to end his driving career and generate medical bills that arrived in the family like waves, and seen one after another, each one larger than the last. Mother's income covered the basics at home. It didn't cover anything beyond that. The scholarship covered tuition. It didn't cover the gap that opened up when his father stopped working. Ethan left school at the beginning of his junior year. He had told himself it was temporary. He had believed that. He moved back home first. Pick up a work at a local garage, the same kind of intuition with engines that had made him good at engineering theory, made him genuinely valuable with actual machinery, and sent as much money home as he could while trying to, and save enough to return to schools the following year. But the medical bills didn't stop. And when a different kind of medical problem arrived, his mother, a diagnosis that used words Ethan had to look up and then wished he hadn't, the following year became the year after that, which became something he stopped naming. He had been in the city for 8 months when the walls came in all the way. And his mother had passed in March. His father, already diminished by injury and grief, in ways that went beyond the physical, had moved in with his sister in Kentucky. And the lease on the apartment Ethan had been renting with 2 roommates ran out, and none of them could cover the renewal. And the roommate's mate had people to go to. Ethan didn't. He had spent 1 week on a friend's couch feeling the exact particular weight of someone who knows they are using up their welcome. And then he had picked up his backpack and walked out and started learning how to survive. 8 months since then, he told all of it without looking for sympathy. He told it like a report. This happened, and then this happened, and then this. And Marcus listened to every word without interrupting. Ethan finished. The food had arrived, a breakfast plate with eggs and toast and sausage and a glass of orange juice that Ethan forced himself to eat slowly because he knew from experience what happened when a body that had been running on almost nothing was suddenly given a full plate. For a long moment after Ethan was stopping, Marcus said nothing. And then you studied mechanical engineering, 2 years. In junior year left when I dropped out, and you've been working on engines at garages. Here I can find the work. Marcus nodded. He picked up his coffee. He set it down without drinking. You found a wallet with over $5,000 cash in it. And you had nothing. You walked 40 minutes in the cold to return every dollar. Sir, why? Ethan had been waiting for the question. He had thought about it during the 40-minute walk. He had thought about it while standing in the cold parking lot with the wallet open in his hands. Because it wasn't mine, he said. Marcus looked at him. A lot of people would have told themselves they needed it more. Ethan was quiet for a moment, but I knew who I was when I found it. I wanted to still know who I was when I put it down. The silence that followed that sentence lasted a long time. And Marcus reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a card. Simple card, a name, a phone number, nothing else. Slid it across the table to Ethan. Take this, he said. And you're ready to stop surviving and start building something. You call that number. Ethan looked at the card. He didn't pick it up immediately. I'm not looking for charity, he said. I know, Marcus said. And that's exactly why I'm giving you the number. Ethan picked up the card. He folded it once, and eating very carefully, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket against the lining, and he kept the things that mattered most. He finished his breakfast. When he stood to leave, Marcus said one more thing. He turned back. Most people never face a test like the one you faced this morning. And most of the ones who do face it fail it. Marcus held his gaze. And should know that. Ethan nodded once. He walked out of Eddie's diner into the cold morning air and did not allow himself to think about the card until he had walked half a block. And he stopped. He put his hand against his jacket where the card was. He could feel the stiffness of it through the fabric. He didn't know what would come next. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, something had shifted. He kept walking. And he could not have known what he had no way of knowing, standing on that cold sidewalk with a business card over his heart, was that there was a man on the other side of the parking lot who had seen everything. It was Cole Ramirez. Cole had been in that parking lot that morning for reasons he had no intention of explaining to anyone. And he was 31 years old, medium height, with a narrow face and eyes that moved with the constant small calculations of a person who spent their life looking for angles. He had been watching from the shadow of the warehouse's service entrance when the homeless kid found the wallet. He had watched the kid open it. He had watched him count the money. And he had watched him put every dollar back. That part had surprised Cole. He hadn't expected it. He'd spent a few seconds re-evaluating what he was seeing, checking himself to make sure he hadn't missed something. But no, the kid had genuinely returned it. All of it. And he then walked away like it was nothing. Cole had filed that information away in the particular mental folder where he kept things he might find useful. These Cole Achiras understood one thing better than most people. Information was leverage. And what he had just witnessed, a homeless young man finding and returning a Hell's Angels wallet, was not just a nice story. It was an opportunity. He just had to figure out how. Stood in the shadow of the warehouse entrance, watching the kid disappear around the corner in the direction of the diner, and thought of Fee. He spent 4 days thinking. In those 4 days, Ethan moved through his usual routine, the shelter intake lines, in the parking structure stairwell, in the careful management of the 43 cents, and whatever small amounts of cash he was able to pick up doing odd jobs at the loading dock of a warehouse 2 miles east. Kept the card Marcus had given him in the lining of his jacket. He did not call the number. He had told himself he would think about it. He was still thinking. On the fourth day, Cole made his move. Started with a conversation not with Ethan, but with 3 or 4 people who moved in the same general orbit of streets and shelters where Ethan spent his time. And Cole was good at these conversations. He had a quality that served him well in environments. He could talk to people in a way that sounded like he was on their side while he was sliding something false in between the true things. "You know that kid, Ethan?" Cole would say, casual. Like it had just come up. "The one who found that biker's wallet?" And people would nod because word had spread in the way word spreads in communities where everybody is paying close attention to everything because they have to be. "It was there," Cole would say. "I saw what happened." And then he would pause. The pause was important. It created the space into which suspicion could flow. I mean, he returned it, eventually, but I saw him count it first. And he really counted, like he was thinking about it. And then, I don't know. And the people can say they returned everything, but I was there. He saw him with the money in his hands for a while. He never said Ethan stole anything. He was too careful for that. He just planted the seed that said, maybe not everything was as simple as it looked. And within 2 days, and a version of what Cole had been saying had made its way through 4 or 5 different channels and growing slightly, with each transmission the way these things always do, until it had become, and someone saw him pocket some of the money first. Ethan didn't know any of this yet. And he found out on a Tuesday morning, when the man who managed overnight stays at the shelter on Creston Avenue, a decent man named Arthur, who had always been straightforward with him, pulled him aside before the morning lineup and said, and so quietly and without looking directly at him, that there were some concerns that had been raised. "And kind of concerns?" Ethan asked. Arthur looked uncomfortable. "About the wallet. Someone is saying you didn't return everything." Ethan went very still. "Who is saying that? I don't know who it started with." "It's going around." "It's not true," Ethan said. "You returned every dollar, every card, everything." "Believe you," Arthur said, and Ethan thought he probably did. But I can't have disputes like this in the building. If there's a question about you right now, I have to ask you to make other arrangements until it gets sorted out." Ethan looked at Arthur for a moment. He understood. He didn't blame him. Arthur had a building to run and people inside it had depended on that building functioning without conflict. "All right," Ethan said. He picked up his backpack and walked out. And he found Cole later that afternoon. He hadn't gone looking for him, specifically, but in a neighborhood this size, paths converged. He was walking past the loading dock of a grocery distribution center when he heard Cole's voice from the other side of a parked van talking to someone. Ethan stopped. He stood very still and listened. Cole was telling the story again. The same story. The planted pause, the careful insinuation. Ethan stood behind the van, with his jaw clenched and his hands at his sides, and listened to a version of the worst morning of his recent life get twisted into something that suggested he was a liar. He came around the side of the van. Cole saw him. His expression didn't change much, a slight flicker, quickly controlled. And the man he'd been talking to looked between them and found something else to do immediately. And they stood facing each other. "Why?" Ethan said. Cole tilted his head. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Pause. Cole's eyes made the quick, calculating movement that was natural to them. "You told people what I saw. You weren't there. I was in the parking lot. And you saw me return every dollar." Cole spread his hands. "He saw you with a wallet. I saw you with a lot of cash. Saw you counting it. What happened after that?" He shrugged. "I can't be sure." Ethan looked at him. He wanted to say 10 things. He said none of them. "What do you want?" he said instead. That was the question Cole had been waiting for. Ethan could see it in the way he straightened slightly. "Just a person who saw something," Cole said. "I'm not asking for anything." But people are going to believe what they believe. Especially about someone like you. He let that land. In Shidif. No offense. But you're homeless. You're nobody. They're going to believe the guy who says he saw you pocket the cash before you gave back the rest. "I'm not paying you to tell the truth," Ethan said. His voice was flat. "I'm not asking you to." They looked at each other. "I'm telling you how it is," Cole said. "That's all." Ethan turned and walked away. He walked 4 blocks before he stopped. He was standing on a corner near the entrance to the Creston Avenue Bridge, and he put his hand on the railing and just stood there for a moment, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settle over him. He had done the right thing. He had made the hardest choice of his life in that parking lot in the dark, with no one watching. And now a man who hadn't even been close enough to see clearly was using that choice to destroy what little credibility Ethan had. He reached into his jacket, found the card, turned it over in his fingers without taking it out fully. Put it back. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But 3 days later, he was. In Idisode, 3 days later, his backpack disappeared from the parking structure stairwell. He came back from the warehouse loading dock job to find the corner where he slept empty. In the backpack, his few documents, a change of clothes, a photograph of his mother. And gone. Dennis said he hadn't seen anything. Ray was gone too, just gone, the way people sometimes went, overnight and without warning. Ethan sat down on the cold concrete where his cardboard had been. He sat for a long time. He thought about the card. He thought about what Marcus had said when he handed it over. And you're ready to stop surviving and start building something. He thought about the photograph of his mother, which was now gone, and allowed himself 30 seconds of a grief he usually kept behind walls. And he let the 30 seconds end. He pulled out the card. Borrowed a phone from Dennis. He dialed. It rang twice. "Yeah," said a voice that Ethan recognized. "This is Ethan Brooks," he said. "And you gave me your card. I don't know if you remember." "And remember," Marcus said immediately. A pause. "Where are you?" The address Ethan gave Marcus was the corner of Creston and 9th, a spot he'd chosen because it was public, because there was a street light, and because it was the kind of place where he could stand without looking like he was waiting for trouble. He gave the address, and Marcus said 2 words, "Stay there." Then the line went dead. Ethan stood on that corner for 2 hours. He didn't pace. He didn't sit. He stood with his back straight and his hands in his jacket pockets and watched the street move around him, the morning commuters, the delivery trucks, and the school kids in groups of 3 and 4. In general tide of a city that had no particular awareness of the fact that one of its inhabitants was standing at an intersection with nothing left and a borrowed phone and a piece of cardboard in his memory where a life used to be. The first hour, he was fine. The second hour, the doubt started. And not about Marcus, about himself, about whether this was a mistake not calling, but everything before it. And the choice in the parking lot, the walk to the diner, and the careful, stubborn refusal to take something that could have changed everything. Because right now, and this morning, standing on Creston and 9th, with his backpack gone and his documents gone, and the photograph of his mother gone. The math of that choice felt brutal in a way it hadn't felt that morning in the parking lot. He had been good, and it had cost him everything he had left. He knew that logic was wrong. He knew it the way you know something, with the rational part of your mind while the rest of you is too tired and too cold to fully believe it. Stood there, and he held on to the knowing like a rope, and he did not let go. At the start of the third hour, he heard the motorcycle. Easy. One bike, not a fleet, just one engine, unmistakable in the particular way that particular kind of engine announced itself, pulling onto Creston from the north and slowing as it approached the intersection. Marcus Callahan cut the engine and stepped off like a man who had somewhere to be and had decided this was exactly where that somewhere was. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the empty shoulders where a backpack should have been. He looked at the set of Ethan's jaw and the way his eyes had the particular quality of someone who has been keeping themselves together through concentrated will for longer than is comfortable. Didn't say anything about any of that. What he said was, "You eaten today?" Ethan said, "Get on." Ethan got on. Marcus took him to a place called Hennessy's, a diner 2 miles east that was smaller and older than Eddie's and smelled like bacon grease and coffee in a way that suggested it had smelled exactly like that for 40 years. He ordered for both of them without asking, 2 breakfasts, 2 coffees, and when the server left, he put both forearms on the table and looked at Ethan directly. "Tell me what happened," Ethan told him. Elevate the shelter, in Arthur's quiet apology, in Cole Ramirez and his careful insinuations, in the van at the loading dock, in the conversation where Cole had looked him in the eye and explained precisely how he intended to make Ethan's honesty work against him. He told it without dramatics and without asking for anything at the end of it, because he still wasn't entirely sure what he was doing here or what he thought Marcus Callahan could actually do about any of it. Marcus listened the same way he had listened in Eddie's. Completely. Without offering sympathy at the points where sympathy would have been natural, which somehow made him easier to talk to than someone who would have. When Ethan finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. And he said, "This man Cole, he saw you in the parking lot." He says he did. "He was far enough back that I didn't see him." "Yes." "And he watched you return the wallet. He watched me find it and open it." What he's claiming is that he couldn't see clearly whether I kept some or not. Marcus picked up his coffee. Why? What does he get out of this? Ethan had been thinking about that for 3 days. "Control," he said, "not money. He didn't ask me for money. He just wanted me to know that he could make me look like a thief if he decided to. And that there was nothing I could do about it because nobody was going to take my word over his." Marcus set the coffee down. "He wanted you afraid." "Did it work?" Ethan met his eyes. "I'm here, aren't I?" And as something moved across Marcus's face, not a smile, exactly. And something smaller and more specific than that. "Yeah," Marcus said. "And you are." The food arrived, and Marcus waited until Ethan had taken several bites before he spoke again. "And you said your documents are gone. My ID, my birth certificate. I had copies stored at the shelter, on Creston. But if they pull my file over the complaint, you know someone who handles document replacement." Marcus said it, the way someone says something that is not a big deal, precisely because they have the resources to make it not a big deal. And he's saying, "That's manageable. The other thing," he paused, "the other thing takes a conversation." Ethan looked up from his plate. "I want to bring someone else in on this," Marcus said. "Her name is Diane. She runs community liaison work for our chapter. And she's been dealing with situations like Cole Ramirez for 20 years. And she knows how these things move through a neighborhood, and she knows how to stop them. And you don't want a war started on my behalf, Ethan said immediately. Marcus shook his head. That's not how Diane works. Not how we work. Not for something like this. He was quiet for a moment. And what you did, returning that wallet that matters. Just to me, to what we stand for. And I'm not going to sit here and watch some sidewalk con artist use your honesty as a weapon against you. Ethan looked at the table. You asked me why, he said. In the diner. Why I returned it, I remember. You should know I've been asking myself the same question for 3 days. His voice was steady. Not second-guessing the choice, just asking myself whether I was naive. And whether I was wrong to think that doing the right thing would lead to something other than exactly this. And Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know the difference between naive and faithful? Ethan looked up. Naive is believing the world always rewards good choices. Faithful is making the good choice anyway, knowing it might not. Marcus held his gaze. And which one were you in that parking lot? Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about it. Faithful, he said, finally. And he think, I hope. Then you weren't wrong, Marcus said. And you were just early. Diane Mercer arrived at Hennessy's 45 minutes later. And she was a compact woman in her early 50s, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of postures that suggested she had spent decades in rooms where posture mattered. And she wore a canvas work jacket and boots, and she sat down across from Ethan, without ceremony, and looked at him the way people look at someone they are actively and seriously trying to understand. And Marcus told me the basics on the phone, she said. I want to hear it from you. Ethan told it a third time. And Diane listened. She asked 2 questions in the middle, not interrupting, just brief and precise. The questions of someone who was building a map in their head and needed 2 specific coordinates confirmed. When he finished, she sat back and folded her hands. Nicole Ramirez, she said. I know that name. Both Ethan and Marcus looked at her. Not personally, but the pattern. She leaned forward slightly. This is not the first time something like this has happened in this neighborhood. There have been 3 other incidents in the past 18 months, 2 I know of directly. One I heard about secondhand, where someone with a known reputation in street communities gets targeted with a reputation smear at a moment of vulnerability. And the details are always slightly different, but the shape is the same. She paused. You said he didn't ask you for money. He didn't. And he wanted compliance. He wanted you to be scared of him and indebted to him without money ever changing hands. In that way, there's no direct exchange, nothing traceable, just a young man who's in some sense that someone other can damage him whenever he chooses to. She looked at Ethan steadily. He thought you'd accept that arrangement because you had no resources and no connections and no way to fight back. He was right about the first 2, Ethan said. Yes, Diane said. Miscalculated the third. What happened next moved faster than Ethan expected. Diane was not someone who believed in delay when forward motion was available. Within 24 hours of their meeting at Hennessy's, she had begun making contacts, not the dramatic kind of contacts that announce themselves, the quiet, but persistent kind. And she talked to Arthur at the Creston Avenue shelter, not to pressure him, but to establish facts. She talked to 2 women who ran a community food pantry on the east side who had their own history with Cole Ramirez's operating methods. She talked to a man named Gerald who had been present at the loading dock the day Cole confronted Ethan, a man who had quickly found somewhere else to be, but who, as it turned out, had heard every word. Marcus, for his part, did something simpler, and in some ways more powerful. He went back to the diner, not Eddie's. And he went to 4 different places across the neighborhood. The laundromat on Greer, the barbershop at Pelham and 6th at Pelham, and 6th, the community room at the Riverside Church, that hosted a weekly lunch, places where people gathered and where word traveled. He didn't make speeches. He just told the truth, what had happened, and what he had seen, who Ethan Brooks was, and what he had done in that parking lot, and what was being done to him now. He told it quietly, and he told it completely, and he told it to enough people that the structure Cole had been carefully building began to develop cracks from the inside. Ethan knew none of this in real time. Marcus had arranged for him to stay temporarily at a house belonging to a retired club member named Vincent, who had a spare room and no patience for human suffering when it was preventable. 73, deeply practical and almost entirely silent except for occasional observations about Ethan's posture and the proper way to brew coffee. It was the strangest few days of Ethan's life, and he was grateful for every hour of it. He slept in a bed. He ate regular meals. He showered with hot water for as long as he wanted and stood there the first time until the water started cooling and realized he had been in there for 20 minutes without noticing. He thought about Cole. He thought about what Diane had said not the first time, the same shape, 3 other incidents. And that knowledge did something specific to him. It reframed Cole not as someone who had specifically targeted Ethan, but as someone who had found a method and was running it systematically. It meant that what Diane and Marcus were doing wasn't just about Ethan. It was about the method itself. He thought about that for a long time. In the 3rd day at Vincent's, he called Diane. "I want to help," he said. "And whatever you're doing, I want to be part of it, not just the recipient." And Diane was quiet for a moment. "What do you have in mind?" And Gerald was at the loading dock. He heard Cole's whole pitch. He left because he didn't want to get involved, but he heard it. "And I've already talked to Gerald. I know, but Gerald talking to you is different from Gerald being willing to say it to someone directly." He paused. "And I think if I talk to him not with any pressure, just me and him, he might be willing to stand up if it comes to that." "And do you think so?" Ethan thought about it, because he's not a bad person. He just thought there was no point, that the truth wasn't going to change anything. Another pause. "I think he might have been right about that before." "He might not be right anymore," Diane considered. "Talk to Marcus first." Talked to Marcus that evening. Marcus listened and then said, "You're not wrong about Gerald. But I want you to understand something before you go talk to him." He paused. "When you walk in there and ask him to stand up for you, you're asking him to take a risk. Not a huge one, but real. Cole is going to know, and Cole is going to be unhappy." "No," Ethan said, "and you're okay with that." Gerald deserves to know that there's someone in this who has his back if Cole decides to make things difficult for him. And that's what I want to tell him, that he's not doing it alone." And Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then, you've been homeless for the better part of a year. And you've been lied about, pushed out of your shelter, and had everything you own stolen. And right now, your primary concern is making sure the man you're asking for help doesn't feel alone in taking the risk." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. "All right," Marcus said. "And let me set up the conversation." And Gerald Bowen was 58 years old and had worked the loading dock at a grocery distribution center for 11 years. He was a solid man with a careful face and the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the small dishonesty to have stopped being surprised by it without having become entirely resigned to it. He met Ethan at a coffee shop on Pelham with the air of a man who had agreed to something and was now spending before it began figuring out exactly what he'd agreed to. Ethan bought the coffee. Gerald looked at him over the cup. "You're the one from the parking lot." "Yes, the wallet." Gerald wrapped both hands around his cup. "I heard what Cole was doing to you. You didn't like it, but you didn't say anything, no. He didn't apologize for it and just stated it as a fact. I've got an 11-year job, and I've got a daughter in college. Cole Ramirez has done exactly nothing to me directly, but I've seen how he operates. Didn't want to be on his list. I understand that, Ethan said. And he did. So why are you here? Gerald asked. Because Diane Mercer tells me you heard the entire conversation Cole had with me at the loading dock. It was on the other side of the van. Yes, and you heard him say that he couldn't be sure whether I kept money from the wallet, even though he was in the parking lot and could see what happened. And Gerald was quiet for a moment. He said he couldn't be sure. But you think he was sure? Another pause, longer this time. And Gerald looked into his coffee. He had a very specific tone when he said it. Like someone who has rehearsed something they know isn't true, but has decided it doesn't matter. Ethan nodded. I'm not asking you to get in the middle of anything dangerous. I'm not asking you to go anywhere or do anything that puts your job at risk. What I'm asking is, he paused, in choosing his words, if the truth needs to be said somewhere, officially, be in a context where it actually counts, would you be willing to say it? And Gerald looked at him for a long moment. And if Cole comes at me for it, then he's not coming at you alone, Ethan said simply. And Gerald considered that. Marcus Callahan, he said. Among others. Another long silence. Gerald looked at his hands. He looked at the wall. He looked back at Ethan with the expression of a man completing a calculation that has more variables than he'd like. I'm not doing this for the hells. Angels, he said carefully. No, Ethan said. I'm not asking you to. I'm doing it because a man told the truth in a parking lot and now he's being punished for it, and that's wrong. He said it flatly without decoration. Ethan said, it is. Gerald picked up his coffee. And all right, he said, you've got me. And the thing about Cole Ramirez was that he didn't expect the ground to shift. Spent years operating in a specific ecosystem communities where people had no resources, no connections, no institutional support, and no particular reason to believe that standing up for themselves would accomplish anything other than making their situation worse. He had developed a method that worked precisely because of that ecosystem's specific gravity, the way it pulled everything downward and inward, and made collective resistance feel like an abstraction. And he hadn't accounted for was someone coming from outside that gravity field entirely. And Diane moved methodically. She documented. She talked to people who had been through similar situations in the past 18 months and recorded what she heard. She did not threaten Cole. She did not approach him. And she simply assembled, with quiet thoroughness, a picture of what he had been doing and to whom, and she made sure that picture existed in multiple places and was known to multiple people. And Marcus, in his own way, did something simpler. He made Ethan visible. Not in a loud way, not in a way that announced itself. Just visible. He brought Ethan to 3 different community spaces over the course of a week. And not to tell his story, just to be there, to be a person with a face and a name who existed in the same neighborhood where the lie about him was circulating. He introduced him to people. He stood beside him. The way someone stands beside someone they have chosen to stand beside, and that posture communicated something without words that no amount of talking could have replicated. And people updated their picture. The version of Ethan that Cole had been seeding a homeless nobody whose word nothing started competing with another version. A young man that Marcus Callahan vouched for. A young man who had, by all accounts, that kept coming back from multiple directions, returned $5,000 without being asked. A young man who, when the person who was lying about him found him at a loading dock and explained that nobody would believe him anyway, had simply walked away without doing anything dramatic or violent or even particularly loud. Any that portrait the quiet, the restraint, the dignity turned out to be more powerful than Cole had anticipated. 80, the whisper campaign began to develop a countercurrent. Ethan felt it shift on a Wednesday afternoon. He was walking through the neighborhood near the food pantry. On the east side, he'd been volunteering there for 3 days, partly because it gave him something useful to do, and partly because Diane had suggested it in her mild, indirective way that somehow always turned out to be correct when a woman he didn't know stopped him on the street. She was in her 60s, with gray braids and reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the embarrassing of a person who said what she meant without particular concern for how it landed. "And you're Ethan," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. "And my nephew told me what happened to you, the wallet, and then the other thing." She paused. "I want you to know that I know Dolores at the Creston shelter. Dolores knows Arthur, and Arthur didn't want to ask you to leave. He felt terrible about it." Ethan didn't say anything. "I'm telling you so you know," she said, "that the people who are supposed to be looking out for you in this neighborhood are not your enemies." Just needed the truth to catch up. She nodded once, like a period at the end of a sentence, and kept walking. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't fully realized had been tight. In the confrontation, because there was going to be a confrontation, that was the shape of things Diane had from the beginning came on a Thursday. Ethan had been at the food pantry all morning. He was carrying a stack of flattened cardboard boxes from the back to the recycling bins outside when he heard Cole's voice from around the corner of the building. Cole was talking to a man. Ethan didn't recognize someone younger, maybe 19, 20, with a thin jacket and nervous eyes. And Cole was doing the thing he did, and the careful, the sideways insinuation in building a version of events that served some purpose Ethan could only partly see from here. Stopped. He listened for a moment. Cole was talking about Ethan. Same story. Same patient dismantling of someone else's credibility for no clear reason that the kid in front of him could have named. Ethan set down the cardboard boxes. He walked around the corner. Cole saw him immediately. His expression did the flicker thing, quickly controlled, back to neutral. And did the young kid with the nervous eyes looked between them and started to back up. "You can go," Ethan said to the kid, not unkindly. And just factually. The kid went. Ethan and Cole stood facing each other for the second time. "This is getting old," Cole said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It is." Something in Ethan's tone was different from the last time, and Cole heard it. His eyes did the quick calculation. "You think you've got backup now. You think the truth is starting to move faster than the lie," Ethan said. "And I think that's going to be a problem for you." And Cole's jaw tightened, just slightly. "You don't know what you're getting into." "And tell me," Ethan said. "Explain it to me. Because I want to understand, what exactly does this give you? What do you get from making me look like a thief? Not money." "You didn't want money, so what is it?" Cole was quiet. "Control," Ethan said, answering his own question. "And you wanted me to know you could do this, so that I'd spend my time managing you instead of building anything. And so that I'd be looking over my shoulder instead of moving forward." He paused. "I think you do this because it's the only power you actually have. And I think somewhere you know that, and it eats at you." King's face changed. Just for a second, something real moved through it that wasn't the careful performance. Anger, yes, but something underneath the anger that was rawer and less controlled. "You don't know anything about me," Cole said. "No," Ethan said. "I don't. And I'm not your enemy. I'm not trying to be." He meant it. He could hear that he meant it. And he thought Cole could hear it too. But I'm done being afraid of you. And the people around here, they're starting to know what you've been doing. Not just to me, to others. Cole was very still. Diane Mercer has been talking to people, Ethan said. She knows about the other situations. In the same pattern, a silence. Cole looked at him for a long moment. And he looked away just briefly, just a flicker, and that flicker told Ethan more than everything else combined. And we're done here, Cole said. He started to walk away. Ethan said. He stopped, didn't turn around. And the people who heard you aren't going to forget what they heard, Ethan said. I think you should know that, not as a threat, just the way things are. Cole walked away. He did not look back. Ethan stood beside the recycling bins and breathed for a moment. He became aware that his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear. He realized, but from the aftermath of adrenaline, the way the body discharges tension it has been holding. Pressed his palms flat against his thighs and waited for the shaking to stop. He did. He picked up the cardboard boxes. He walked to the recycling bins. He put the boxes in. He went back inside and finished the morning's work. That evening, Marcus called. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Talked to Cole today." A pause. "Tell me," Ethan told him. All of it, straight through. Marcus was quiet for a moment when he finished. "And you went alone?" "Yes, I would have come with you." "No," Ethan said, "but it needed to be me." Another pause. "Longer." "Yes," Marcus said. "It did." He was quiet for a moment. And Diane found the third person today, from the third incident 18 months ago. A woman named Patricia. Cole ran the same play on her. And she was willing to talk. Ethan sat with that for a moment. And 3 other people, the same careful dismantling, the same weaponization of someone's vulnerability. "And what happens now?" he asked. "Now it goes to the shelter committee and the community association," Marcus said. "And Diane is presenting everything she has, nothing violent, nothing illegal, just the full picture. In front of the people who run the spaces Cole has been operating in." A pause. "He won't be able to work the same way in this neighborhood after that. In the places he's been operating will know what to look for." Ethan thought about that. "Is that enough?" he said. "It's the right answer," Marcus said. "It's not the satisfying one. It's the right one." He understood. He sat with it. "Marcus," he said, "the other night you said I was early. And when I said I didn't know if the right choice was going to lead to anything. And remember, I think I'm starting to understand what you meant." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You kept your head down when I expected people to swing. And you talked to Gerald like a human being instead of a transaction. And you went to Cole alone and told him the truth without a threat in it." He paused. "And that's not nothing, Ethan. That's not nothing at all." Ethan looked at the wall of Vincent's spare room. The old man had gone to bed an hour ago. And the house was quiet. "I want to ask you something," Ethan said. "Ask." "The garage you mentioned, the one you talked about when we were at Hennessy's the mechanic. And Gus Miller. Is that offer still on the table?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Never came off the table." Ethan nodded to himself. He felt something settle, not the dramatic settling of a story finding its resolution, but the quieter, more real settling of a person who has decided something and knows they mean it. "All right," he said. "I'll call Gus in the morning," Marcus said. "Meet him this week." "Okay, get some sleep, Ethan." And he said goodnight and ended the call. He lay back on the narrow bed in Vincent's spare room and looked at the ceiling and thought about the parking lot behind the Meridian warehouse. He thought about that moment, the wallet open in his hands, and indeed the money visible, and nobody watching, and the whole city still asleep. He thought about what it had cost him since then. The shelter. In the backpack, the photograph of his mother, the slow, grinding work of proving that a lie was a lie in a world that had every structural reason to believe the lie first. And he thought about what he had now that he hadn't had before. Gerald, who had decided the truth was worth saying. And Diane, who had spent 2 weeks rebuilding something Cole had tried to knock down. And Vincent and his coffee and his opinions about posture. Bare room with a real bed, a number in his phone that answered on the second ring. And the specific, unglamorous, irreducible fact that he still knew exactly who he was. And that nobody had taken that from him, and that they had tried one, and it was still there, and still intact, and still the same as it had been in that parking lot at 5:47 in the morning when the whole world was asleep. He closed his eyes. He thought, tomorrow, Gus Miller. He thought, this is what early looks like. He let himself sleep. Vince Miller's garage smelled like motor oil and old coffee, and something underneath both of those things that Ethan could only describe as skies, as decades, the particular accumulation of a space that had been used hard and consistently by someone who knew. And what they were doing and didn't care much about appearances. And Gus himself was 67, built like a man who had spent 40 years moving heavy things and hadn't stopped, and with hands that were permanently stained at the knuckles, and a way of looking at an engine that reminded Ethan of the way certain professors had looked at mathematical problems, not like a task to complete, but like a conversation to have. He had been a Hells Angels mechanic for 30 years before his knees made the long rides impractical, and he had run this garage independently for the decades since, employing a rotating cast of 2 or 3 people at a time and maintaining the kind of reputation that Miss Slotik waited for an appointment and a clientele that came from 3 counties over. Marcus brought Ethan on a Wednesday morning and introduced them with the economy of a man who trusted both parties to figure out what they needed to figure out. He said, Gus, this is Ethan Brooks. Engineering background, good with machines, needs a chance. Ethan, this is Gus Miller. He doesn't give chances twice. Then Marcus stepped back and folded his arms and let it happen. When Gus looked at Ethan for a moment. Then he said, you know the difference between a fuel injector and a carburetor? Sir, you know it because you studied it or because you've worked on both? Both. Gus made a sound that was not quite a grunt and not quite a word. He turned and walked toward the back of the garage and said over his shoulder, come here. What followed was not an interview. It was closer to a test, except that Gus didn't frame it as a test. He just started asking Ethan questions about the engine he was currently working on. A 1,887 Harley-Davidson Sportster with an electrical fault that had been defeating him for 2 days. And then he listened to the answers with his full attention and without condescension. And when Ethan said something that was wrong, he said no immediately and waited. And when Ethan corrected himself, Gus moved on without comment. 20 minutes in, Ethan pointed to a connector on the wiring harness near the ignition module and said, that looks like it's been reseated improperly. And the contact might be intermittent. It'll check out fine when you test it cold, but it's going to arc under heat. And Gus looked at the connector. He looked at it for a long time. He picked up a test probe and checked it. And then he put the probe down and was quiet for a moment. I've had 3 people look at this bike, he said. And none of them found that. It's easy to miss if you're testing at ambient, Ethan said. And Gus looked at him. Then he looked at Marcus. Then he looked back at the engine. And Monday morning, he said, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And Marcus said nothing. But when Ethan glanced at him, there was the thing on his face that wasn't quite a smile, the same specific expression from the diner. Something quieter, then satisfaction and more permanent. The first week at Gus's garage was the hardest week Ethan had spent in years, and also the best. Hard because Gus operated on the assumption that competence was the minimum and that anything above competence needed to be demonstrated, not stated. He did not explain things twice. He did not soften corrections. He ran the garage at a pace that assumed everyone inside it was operating at full capacity and would catch up if they weren't. Ethan caught up. He caught up by arriving at 6:30 instead of 7, by staying 45 minutes past closing to finish work that wasn't finished, asking precise questions at precise moments, and not asking anything when the answer was available if he thought hard enough. In the end of the first week, Gus had said 7 words to him that were not instructions or corrections. You've got a good pair of hands. Ethan carried those 7 words like they were something valuable. Because from Gus Miller, they were. Marcus called on Friday evening. How's it going? Gus told me I have good hands. Pause. That's basically a standing ovation from Gus. That's what I figured. You need anything? Ethan thought about it. I'm okay, he said. And for the first time in a very long time, he meant it without the particular qualification that the phrase had carried for the past year, the okay that meant functional, and seal surviving, and together, holding together. And this was a different okay, an actual one. He was staying in a room above a laundromat, 3 blocks from the garage, and arranged through Diane, and affordable on the small wage Gus paid, which would grow once the trial period was done. And he had a bed, a hot plate, a window that looked out onto a street that had nothing special about it and everything right. He had replaced his documents through the contact Marcus had mentioned. He had a library card that he'd used twice in the first week to look up engineering texts that Gus's work reminded him he needed to relearn. He was rebuilding, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily. The way actual rebuilding works. And what Ethan didn't know, what he was, in the middle of finding out, without fully realizing it, was that Marcus had been doing something for the past 3 weeks that went beyond making calls and introducing people. He had been talking, not to important people, not to anyone with institutional power, just to people. The same way he'd talked in the barbershop and the laundromat and the church community room, except now the story had more of a shape. Ethan's name kept appearing in conversations Marcus was having across the chapter, not as a cause to champion, but as an example. A real one, the kind that doesn't come along often. And in the chapter, things moved by their own logic. And Victor Hale was the first to ask directly. He was 44, had been with the chapter for 12 years, and had the kind of directness that didn't bother softening itself. He called Marcus on a Saturday morning and said, I heard about the kid with the wallet. And the whole story. You heard right, Marcus said. And the thing with Cole after. A pause. What are we doing about it? Diane handled the community piece. In the shelter committee, the association. Cole's been called to account in the spaces where he operates. That's not what I asked, Victor said. I asked what we're doing. And Marcus was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? Thinking, Victor said, slowly, that a young man returned your wallet. Everything in it. Then got burned for it. Then came back from that. And most of the people in the chapter know the first half of the story, and none of them know the second half. He paused. And I think they should know. Why? Because, Victor said, we talk a lot about what we stand for. And this kid is what we stand for. And I'd like the two things to meet each other. And Marcus thought about it. Let me talk to him first. He talked to Ethan that Sunday. They were at Hennessy's again, it had become, without either of them naming it, their place for important conversations. And Marcus laid it out without decoration. There was a chapter gathering in 3 weeks. Not a formal event, just a large meeting at the clubhouse. There would be 120 or so people there. members and families, and the extended community that moved with the chapter. Marcus wanted to tell Ethan's story, all of it, the parking lot and the wallet, and Cole and Gerald and Gus. In front of 120 people, Ethan said. Inver take. Ethan looked at his coffee. Why? Because Victor's right. Because it matters. Not for you, you don't need it. But for the story itself, he paused. There are people in that room who've forgotten what it looks like when someone chooses right over easy. People who need a reminder that it exists. He held Ethan's gaze. I'm not asking you to perform anything. I'm not asking you to make a speech. You just have to be there. I'll do the talking. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I'm not comfortable being made into something I'm not, he said finally. And I found a wallet. I returned it. That's all I did. No, Marcus said. That's exactly what I'm going to tell him. Another pause. All right, Ethan said. The gathering was on a Thursday evening in the second week of December, and it was larger than Marcus had said. And not 120, closer to 380. Ethan found this out when Marcus picked him up from the garage, and they pulled up to the clubhouse, and Ethan looked at the number of vehicles outside and said very quietly, Marcus. And word spread, Marcus said. You said 120. He said give or take. Ethan looked at the building. That's a significant take. Yeah, Marcus said. He turned off the engine. You okay? Ethan thought about it honestly. His heart was moving faster than usual. His hands were still. He thought about the parking lot. He thought about standing in front of Linda at the diner counter and asking which one was Marcus Callahan. He had walked into that room not knowing what was on the other side of it, and it had been the right thing to do. Yes, he said. Let's go. The room was full and warm and loud, with the particular volume of a large group of people who know each other well and have not seen each other in a while. Ethan walked in beside Marcus, and the noise did not stop. Nobody announced their arrival, and for a few minutes Ethan was simply in the room, anonymous in the crowd, and shaking hands with people Marcus introduced him to. He's saying his name and nodding and doing the ordinary social work of being a person among other people. Then Marcus stood up. The room took about 30 seconds to notice and settle, and then it was very quiet. Marcus did not use notes. He stood at the front of the room, the way he stood everywhere, without performance, without positioning, just present and direct, and he told the story. He told it from the parking lot. He told every dollar amount, every specific detail, every beat of the morning that Ethan had walked into Eddie's diner with a wallet that wasn't his and placed it in Marcus's hands. He told Cole's story fully and without softening it. He told Gerald and Diane and Vincent and the spare room in Gus's garage and the wiring harness connector on the 1987 Sportster that 3 other mechanics had missed. He told it simply, without sentimentality, without amplification. And the room was so quiet that Ethan could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. And then Marcus said, this young man had nothing. And he still chose to do the right thing. And when someone tried to use that against him, he didn't fold. He didn't get angry. He didn't ask for revenge. He just kept being who he was. He paused. And that's harder than it sounds. Most people can hold on to who they are when the circumstances are easy. He did it when everything was working against him. Another pause. I want him to know that we see that, all of us. He looked at Ethan directly. And the room, 380 people came to their feet. Not in the theatrical, orchestrated way of a scripted moment. In the particular uneven way of a genuine one, where people stand because standing is the only response the body finds available. And where some people are on their feet before they've decided to stand, and the sound builds from one corner and spreads until the whole room is in it. Ethan stood at the back of the room, and the sound washed over him, and he held himself together with everything he had. He had spent a year being invisible, not just to strangers. In himself, the particular invisibility of a person who has stopped expecting to matter to anyone and has started organizing their life around that expectation. And this was the opposite of invisible. He didn't know what to do out with that. He just stood in it and let it be real. Marcus was watching him from the front of the room. He gave a single small nod. Ethan nodded back. After the formal part of the evening, a line for Marcus had not orchestrated and could not have stopped if he'd wanted to. People came to talk to Ethan, not in a frantic celebrity way, in the quieter way of people who have something specific they want to say and are patient about saying it. A man named Ray Cortez, E.T., who had been with the chapter for 22 years, and shook Ethan's hand and said, "My son is 23. I'm going to tell him this story." A woman named Sandra, whose husband had been a club member for 15 years, said, "My husband talks about character all the time. I always tell him it's easy to talk about. You didn't just talk about it." Younger man, maybe 26, he's 27, who Ethan later found out had only been with the chapter for 8 months, and stood in front of him for a moment and then said, "He grew up in the system. In foster care. I know what it feels like to have nothing and be expected to prove yourself anyway." He paused. "He just wanted to tell you that." Ethan shook his hand. "Thank you for telling me. Does it feel worth it?" the young man asked. "In the choice in the parking lot. Does it feel worth it now?" Ethan thought about it. "It felt worth it in the parking lot," he said. "Before any of this happened. That's the part I keep coming back to." And the young man looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. He nodded once and walked back into the crowd. And Marcus found Ethan 40 minutes later, in a quieter corner near the back, sitting with a cup of coffee and the particular expression of someone who has been processing a large amount of experience and has run temporarily out of room. And he sat down across from him. "How are you doing?" he said. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. He stopped. "You don't have the right word for it. You don't need one." Ethan looked at the room. People were talking, drinking coffee. The noise had come back up to its normal level. And 380 people who had stood up for him. "I keep thinking about Cole," he said. Marcus looked at him. I'm not angry. I just keep thinking about what Diane said. It wasn't just me, that there were others." He paused. "Tricia and the 2 others she knows about. They didn't get this." He gestured at the room, the people, the evening. They went through the same thing, and they were just alone. Marcus was quiet. "Is there something that can be done for them?" Ethan said. "Not by me specifically. I don't know them. But is there something Diane is doing, or the community associations?" "Diane's already working on it," Marcus said. "Patricia specifically has agreed to meet with the association formally next month. The others are more cautious, but Diane is patient." He paused. "And you've been thinking about this for a while, since you told me about them," Ethan said. And Marcus looked at him steadily. "You know what the difference is between someone who does the right thing once and someone who keeps doing it?" Ethan waited. "The second one doesn't stop asking questions like that," Marcus said. Ethan looked at his coffee. "Marcus," he said, "when you gave me your card at Eddie's, and you said when you're ready to stop surviving and start building something." He looked. "What did you mean by building? Just the job? The garage?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding what to say, but the quiet of someone deciding how much to say. "No," he said finally, "not just the garage." He set his own coffee down. "It was going to wait," Marcus said. "Give it more time." He looked at Ethan. "I think you're ready to hear it." He paused. And Gus isn't going to run that garage forever. His knees are worse than he lets on, and he's been thinking about what happens to the place when he can't keep pace. Another pause. I've been talking to him about a transition over time. Any gradual, someone who could come in as a mechanic, learn the operation, eventually take it over. He held Ethan's gaze. He told me 2 days ago that he's already found that person. Ethan went very still. That's he started. You don't have to respond right now, Marcus said. Early. Nothing is decided yet, but I wanted you to know what you're working toward, if you want to work toward it. He paused. You walked into a diner and put a wallet in my hands. And I told myself that morning that whoever you turned out to be, I wasn't going to let you disappear again. Ethan looked at the table. He had the feeling of someone standing at the edge of something, not a precipice, not a danger, but a threshold. And the particular feeling of a door opening that you had stopped believing you would ever see. You don't know how to, he said. Stop. You don't have to know how to, Marcus said. You just have to show up, which, the thing that wasn't quite a smile, you seemed to be good at. Ethan looked at the room one more time. 380 people who had stood up. Vince and his 7 words. Gerald and his decision at the coffee shop. And Diane and her methodical, patient truth-telling. Vincent and his opinions about posture and coffee. And the woman with the gray braids who had stopped him on the sidewalk. He thought about the parking lot, 5:47 in the morning. Nobody watching. He thought about what he'd said to Marcus in that first breakfast. I knew who I was when I found it. He wanted to still know who I was when I put it down. Still knew. That hadn't changed. Everything else had. He picked up his coffee. He looked at Marcus. Okay, he said. Marcus picked up his coffee. Okay, he said back. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a parking lot beside a dark warehouse, the morning was already beginning to change. A month after the gathering, Ethan arrived at the garage at 6:23. And Gus was already there. He was always already there. Ethan had stopped being surprised by this in the second week and had started using it as a calibration point. He arrived, and Gus had already made coffee. He was on time. If the coffee was still brewing, he was early. The coffee was always already made. And he grew. Gus didn't say anything about the gathering. He didn't acknowledge that it had happened, that 380 people had stood up in a room, that Marcus had told a story in front of all of them that had Gus's name and Gus's garage in it. He just handed Ethan a work order for a 2019 Road King with a transmission issue and said, client needs it by Thursday. Don't let it be Friday. Ethan took the work order. Gus, he said. Gus looked at him. Marcus told me what you said. About the transition, about the garage. He paused. I want you to know I don't take that lightly. Gus was quiet for a moment. The quality of a man who thought before speaking, as a matter of genuine habit rather than politeness. And sometimes the pause was long enough to make people uncomfortable. But Ethan had learned to wait it out. And I've had 4 people work in this garage in the last 10 years, Gus said finally. And of them were technically better than you when they started. Ethan waited. Neither one of them is here anymore, Gus said. And then, you want to know why? Yes, because they thought they were working on machines. He picked up his coffee. And you understand you're working on people's lives. That's different. He turned back to his workbench. And now go look at that transmission. Ethan went and looked at the transmission. December moved quickly. Ethan had not expected that the particular swiftness of days that are full of real work. He had spent so many months in the slow, in the grinding time of survival. Each day stretched itself out across the same small radius of shelters and food lines and temporary arrangements. He had forgotten what it felt like when hours had weight to them. And Tuesday was different from Monday because something had happened on Tuesday that hadn't happened on Monday. Things happened now. He rebuilt a carburetor on a 94 Softail that Gus had declared beyond saving, and then revised that declaration when Ethan had the thing running smoothly by Wednesday afternoon. He diagnosed a recurring stall on a touring bike that had stumped a dealer's service department and 2 independent shops, tracing it to a cracked intake boot that only showed under specific throttle conditions. He made mistakes twice in December alone, and Gus identified both of them before they became problems and showed what he'd missed with the particular efficiency of someone who has corrected the same categories of error in enough different in people to know exactly where the explanation needed to go. He was learning faster than he had expected, not just the mechanical work. The other part, the way Gus talked to clients directly, without condescension, with the specific honesty of a man who respected people enough not to soften bad news unnecessarily. And the way he brought work fairly, without apology, because he knew what the work was worth. And the way he ran the garage as an ecosystem rather than just a business, understanding that the relationships with suppliers and the reputation in the community and the quality of the work were all parts of the same thing. Ethan watched all of it and filed it away in the same part of his mind that had once stored engineering theory. In the third Thursday of December, Marcus stopped by the garage at the end of the day. He didn't come in. He leaned against his motorcycle in the lot and waited for Ethan to come out, which Ethan did at 5:58, 2 minutes before closing. "And walk with me," Marcus said. They walked. For half a block, neither of them said anything. And then Marcus said, "Diane heard back from Patricia today, and she's agreed to speak to the full community association in January." "That's good," Ethan said. "It is." A pause. "And she wanted me to tell you something." Ethan looked at him. "And she said," and I'm quoting here, "tell the wallet kid that he started something he doesn't know he started." Marcus glanced at him. In her words, Ethan was quiet for a moment. What did she mean? "She meant that watching what happened to you, the way things moved, the way people showed up, gave her something she didn't have before. And a reason to believe it was worth saying something." Marcus paused. And do that deliberately. You just existed in a way that made it possible for her." Ethan thought about that. "Cole?" he asked. "The association met with him last week. And then I wasn't there, Diane. Handled it. He's been told clearly that his activities in the neighborhood are documented and that any further incidents will be escalated beyond the community level." He paused. "He hasn't left the neighborhood, but he's quiet." "Quiet is different from gone," Ethan said. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "Quiet is what we have, and quiet is real." He looked at Ethan. "You're not going to get a perfect ending, Ethan. Going to get the truth, which is that a man who operated the way Cole did doesn't transform overnight. The ecosystem he was operating in has changed around him. And that matters." Ethan nodded. He had made his peace with that, mostly. And the part of him that wanted a cleaner resolution had been in conversation with the part of him that understood reality. And the realistic part was, in gradually, winning. "In something else," Marcus said. He stopped walking. Ethan stopped too. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. In white, slightly thick, he held it out. Ethan looked at it. "It is this. Open it." Ethan opened it. Inside was a folded letter on chapter letterhead, and behind the letter, a check. He looked at the amount and then looked at Marcus. "No," he said immediately. "Ethan, no, I haven't earned that." "Not even close to that. It's not a salary," Marcus said. "It's not charity either. It's a loan." He held Ethan's gaze. "For tuition. To go back and finish your engineering degree. Interest. Repayable whenever, over however long it takes. And signed by me and by the chapter treasurer. He paused. It is a legal document. You would owe us the money. And this is not a gift. Ethan looked at the check again. His throat was doing something he didn't have full control over. Why? He said. Because Gus is going to need someone who can run this place in 5 years, Marcus said. And that someone needs an engineering degree. And because you were supposed to finish yours 3 years ago, and life intervened in ways that were not your fault. He paused. And because the chapter voted on it unanimously. After the gathering, Ethan stood on the sidewalk with an envelope in his hands. He thought about his mother, about her face on the day he'd been accepted to the engineering program. And she had cried not sadly, but with the specific pride of a woman who had worked a job she hadn't chosen 20 years so that her son could choose his. He had thought about that face a lot in the past year. He had thought about it in the parking structure on the nights when he was coldest and most tired and most tempted by the particular math that said the right choice was for people who could afford it. He had held onto her face, and he had held the line. And now he was standing on a sidewalk in December with an envelope that said the line had held back. Okay, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. Okay. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder briefly, then let it go. Gus knows about the school schedule. You'll work mornings and go to school in the afternoons, or the reverse, depending on the semester. He's already talked to the department chair at the university about your transcript. He said all of this practically. The practical details were the most important thing right now, which Ethan understood was a kindness. In this, we sorted out the transfer credit issue. Your 2 years count. Be finishing as a junior. Ethan folded the envelope carefully and put it inside his jacket. Against the lining, where he kept the things that mattered. And Marcus, he said. Don't thank me, Marcus said. I mean it. I wasn't going to thank you, Ethan said. I was going to ask you something. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The woman in the photograph, Ethan said. In your wallet. The 2 girls. A pause. Something crossed Marcus's face, not pain, exactly, but the specific expression of someone touching a memory that has both warmth and weight. My wife, Linda, my daughters, Sarah and Beth. He paused. And Sarah's 22 now. Beth is 19. Linda and I have been married 31 years. And they're the reason you had the wallet on you one that morning, Ethan said. In the photograph, I carry it everywhere, Marcus said. Since the girls were born. Ethan nodded. He had been thinking about this for weeks, the photograph, the particular human reality of what he had held in his hands in that parking lot. Not just money, not just cards. A man's family carried close. I want you to know that's part of why, Ethan said. And not the main reason, but part of it. I looked at that photograph and I thought about the person who carried it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I know, he said finally. He figured. They stood there for a moment on the December sidewalk. And come to dinner Sunday, Marcus said. Linda has been asking about you since the gathering. And she was there. By the way, she's the one who stood up first. Ethan blinked. What? When the room stood. She was on her feet before anyone else. Marcus said it simply, without staging it. And said afterward that she wanted to see the young man who had held her family's photograph in his hands and put it back. Ethan didn't have anything to say to that. Sunday, Marcus said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And Sunday dinner at the Callahan house was Marcus and Linda and Sarah, who was home from her nursing program for the holidays, and Beth, who was in her first year of college and had her father's directness and her mother's warmth that expressed itself as an extremely specific opinion about everything delivered with complete goodwill. Linda Callahan was a tall woman in her mid-50s with the kind of steadiness about her that suggested she had been the fixed point around which a great deal of motion had organized itself for a very long time and had made her peace with that role. And she shook Ethan's hand at the door and said, "We're glad you're here," with the particular simplicity of someone who meant it without needing to elaborate. And the meal was loud and comfortable and occasionally competitive in the way that family meals are when the people involved have known each other long enough to skip the polite layers entirely. And Sarah had opinions about the state of emergency nursing that she delivered with the authority of someone who had spent 2 years being tested against reality. And Beth had discovered in her first semester, and she was significantly better at organic chemistry than she had expected to be and was considering whether this changed her plans. And the table had thoughts about this. Ate and listened, and occasionally said something that redirected the conversation like a hand on a rudder, not controlling, just orienting. Ethan sat in the middle of all of it and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happy, exactly, or not just happy, something more specific. The feeling of being inside something, rather than outside it. And being one of the people at the table rather than a person watching through glass. At one point, Beth looked at him directly and said, "Can I ask you something?" "And sure," Ethan said, "when you found the wallet in the parking lot." "Were you tempted?" Linda said. "It's okay," Ethan said. He looked at Beth. "Yes, I was tempted." Beth nodded, processing. "And yet you didn't keep it." "No. Why not? I mean, I understand why not, but I want to hear how you explain it." Ethan thought about it. He had explained it several times now, to different people, in different ways. Each time the question came from someone new, he found he had to find the real answer again, rather than reach for the version he'd already said. "Think," he said slowly, "that there are moments where you find out who you actually are rather than who you tell yourself you are. And I knew that if I kept the money, it would know not other people, not the world. Just me, I would know that when the test came, he failed it. And I'd be carrying that." He paused. I was already carrying a lot. He didn't want to add that. Beth was quiet for a moment. "That's a better answer than I expected," she said. "Beth," Sarah said, not looking up from her plate. "It's a compliment," Beth said. Ethan smiled. It was the most natural smile he'd produced in months. Marcus caught his eye across the table, the thing that wasn't quite a smile. After dinner, when Sarah and Beth had migrated to the living room, and Linda was managing the kitchen with efficient autonomy of someone who preferred to handle that territory alone, Marcus and Ethan's sat at the cleared table with coffee. "And they like you," Marcus said. "They barely know me." "You know what matters." He drank his coffee, Linda especially. Ethan looked toward the kitchen. Linda was moving around in there with a particular energy of someone engaged in something they find genuinely satisfying. "And she stood up first," Ethan said quietly. "She's the one who told me to give you the card," Marcus said. Ethan looked at him. "What? At Eddie's? When you left?" Marcus set down his coffee. "It was going to let you walk out. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I've given my number to people before who weren't ready. And who took the help and ran, and I couldn't tell with you." He paused. "And called me that night. She'd come by the diner that morning to drop something off, and she'd seen the whole thing from the doorway. And she said," he paused, and smiling slightly at the memory, she said, "Marcus, if you don't find that boy and make sure he's all right, I will find him myself." Ethan sat with that for a moment. "She didn't say anything to me at dinner," he said. "She doesn't need to," Marcus said. "You being here is enough for her." Ethan looked at his coffee. Something was moving in his chest that he was having trouble categorizing, not sadness, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. In a particular notion of someone who has been running a debt they didn't know they owed and discovers suddenly that the debt is already paid. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to be honest with me. I'm always honest with you, Marcus said. I know. Ethan looked up. Is this what you've done? The room, the loan, this dinner? Any part of this about the wallet? About owing me something because I returned it? Marcus was very still. I need to know, Ethan said. Because I can't build something real on an obligation. I can't be someone's good deed that they're paying forward. You need to know if you see me as a person or as a debt. And the silence that followed was long enough that Ethan felt the edges of it. And Marcus said, the night after you returned the wallet, told Linda about you, every detail. And she said to me, that's not a story about a wallet. And that's a story about a person. And she was right. He held Ethan's gaze. And you're not a debt, Ethan. You're not a good deed. You're a 24-year-old man who has been through enough to break most people and hasn't broken. He paused. He would have given that card to the person you are, regardless of whether they'd ever touch my wallet. Just took the wallet for me to find out who you were. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, Marcus said. In Trey, from the living room, and Beth's voice carried clearly. I'm just saying that if the chemistry program requires that much calculus, he should warn people up front. And Sarah's voice, equally clear, that is literally what prerequisites are. Ethan looked toward the sound of them. He felt the warmth of the house around him, not the warmth of a building's heating system, but something else. And the particular warmth of a place where people have chosen to be together. Picked up his coffee. He thought about his mother's face. He thought she would have liked Linda. He thought she would have liked all of them. He didn't say that out loud, but he sat with it and let it be real and didn't push it away. In January arrived, and with it the spring semester registration. Ethan sat across from the department's academic advisor, a methodical man named Professor Harlan, who had reviewed Ethan's transcript with the precision of someone disassembling an engine to understand its failure points and listened to him lay out the path. 2 semesters to finish, possibly 3 depending on lab scheduling. Prior coursework was intact. He had a clean academic record from his first 2 years. Interruption was documented. The university had a process for students returning after hardship, and the chapter's loan covered tuition and books with enough margin that he wouldn't need to choose between class and eating. And you understand this is going to be demanding, Professor Harlan said. He was not a man who softened assessments. You've been out for 3 years. And the junior level work assumes fluency with material you covered as a sophomore. You'll need to rebuild that fluency quickly. I know, Ethan said. And the students you'll be working with will be younger. Most of them haven't experienced what you've experienced and can be an advantage or a distraction, depending on how you handle it. Understood. Harlan looked at him over his glasses. And why engineering? Students who return after a significant gap sometimes find that their reasons for choosing the field in the first place no longer apply. They prefer to know that the commitment is current. Ethan thought about the 987 Sportster and about the connector on the wiring harness that 3 other mechanics had missed. And about the way a machine was just a physical argument, a set of claims about how forces and materials and energy could be organized to produce a specific result, and the way finding the fault in that argument was not so. And different from finding the truth in any other kind. And understand how things work, he said. I always have. Engineering is the discipline that asks you to understand well enough to build. And you want to build things. He paused. I've been rebuilding things with my hands for a year. I want to understand them well enough to design them. Insco. Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he began printing the registration forms. The first day of the spring semester was a Tuesday, in late January. And Ethan walked onto campus with this specific feeling of someone stepping back into a place that had once been theirs and discovering it was both exactly the same and entirely different, the same buildings, and the same smell of industrial cleaner and cafeteria food and the cold air coming through the doors of the engineering building, but everything seen now through eyes that had been somewhere else in between. He was older than most of the students in his junior level courses by 3 years in age, and he understood by considerably more than that in the specific way that experience accumulates in a person. He was not distracted by this. He was focused. He went to class. He went to the garage. He came home to the room above the laundromat, and he worked at the kitchen table until 11, sometimes midnight, rebuilding the fluency that Harlan had warned him about. He called Marcus on Sunday evenings. It had become a rhythm, without either of them naming it, and gave a brief account of the week. And Marcus listened, and occasionally said something that reoriented him, and mostly just listened. He called Gus once, on a Friday evening, with a question about a transmission case he'd been thinking about since Monday. Gus answered the question, then said, "You're calling me at 7 on a Friday about a transmission case." Ethan said, a pause. "Good," Gus said, and hung up. Ethan sat with the phone in his hand for a moment and felt something he recognized, after a second, as a specific kind of happiness. But not the large, dramatic kind. The kind that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. Set the phone down. He opened his engineering textbook. He got back to work, part 5, the chain that never ends. In the semester, Ethan finished his engineering degree. Gus Miller fell off a ladder. Not badly, not the way that ends things permanently, though at 67, the word permanently hovered in the room at the hospital for about 40 minutes before the doctor came out and said 2 cracked ribs, sprained wrist, and mandatory rest for 6 weeks. And Marcus was there. Diane was there. Linda had driven herself and arrived before Marcus because she had left the moment she heard. Ethan got the call at 11:15 on a Wednesday morning, walked out of his fluid mechanics lecture without explaining himself to anyone, and was at the hospital by 11:40. And Gus was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking like a man who had been deeply inconvenienced by his own body and had not yet forgiven it. "He left class," Gus said when Ethan walked in. "Yes." "For 2 cracked ribs. For you," Ethan said. Gus made the sound that wasn't quite a grunt and wasn't quite a word. He looked at Marcus. "He left class." "I heard," Marcus said. "In the garage," Gus started. "I'll handle the garage," Ethan said. "Meaning I've been handling the garage. Don't worry about the garage." Gus looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face that Ethan had learned over 18 months of work beside this man to recognize. It was the expression Gus made when something had confirmed what he already believed but had not yet said out loud. "And all right," Gus said. "Don't let Ray touch the Dinah that came in Monday. He overtorques everything." "I know," Ethan said. "I've been retorquing after him for 6 weeks." Gus closed his eyes. "I knew it." Marcus looked at Ethan over Gus's head. And the thing that wasn't quite a smile had graduated, somewhere in the past year and a half, into something more fully itself. And something warmer. Linda put her hand on Ethan's arm briefly as she passed him on her way to the chair beside the bed. And she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In the 6 weeks Gus was out were the 6 weeks that settled everything. Not because they were dramatic, because they were the opposite. They were just work. Insistent, daily, demanding work that Ethan moved through, with the full attention of someone who understood what was being asked of him and had been preparing for it, without knowing that was what he was doing. He put in the garage at 6:30. He managed Ray and a new part-time hire named Dory, who was 22, and had a natural instinct with electrical systems that reminded Ethan of himself 3 years ago, which meant he was patient with her mistakes in a way that Gus had never been able to be entirely patient with his, because Gus had never been 22 and confused and still mostly right. He handled the client conversations. He made the calls to suppliers. He dealt with the insurance inquiry about a repair job from November that had developed a complication, navigating it with a specific combination of technical accuracy and relational directness that he had watched Gus model for a year and a half. In the fourth week, a client came in that Ethan had not met before, a man in his 60s named Harold, who had been bringing his bikes to Gus since the early 90s and who arrived with the particular proprietary air of someone who considers himself a regular and expects that status to be recognized. Harold looked at Ethan behind the counter. He looked at the empty space where Gus usually stood. "Where's Gus?" Harold said. "He's recovering from an injury," Ethan said. "He'll be back in 2 weeks. I'm Ethan. I'll be taking care of your bike while he's out." Harold looked at him. "How long have you been here?" 18 months. "Gus trust you?" "You'd have to ask Gus," Ethan said. "And I'm the one here, so if you want the bike worked on, I'm what you've got." Harold studied him for another moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. "All right, fair enough." He handed over the keys. "It's the Road King outside. And something's off in the front end. I can feel it in the bars, but I can't hear anything wrong." "I'll find it," Ethan said. He found it in 40 minutes. A worn steering head bearing not making noise yet, but past its tolerance point. Harold would have felt it as a subtle heaviness in the steering, most noticeable on slow turns. Another few thousand miles, and it would have been more than subtle. And Harold came back to pick up the bike, and Ethan showed him what he'd found. Harold was quiet for a moment. And he said, "Gus finding you was either very lucky or very smart." "Probably both," Ethan said. "That's how Gus operates." Harold left a $40 tip and told 2 people about the garage before he'd gotten home. Ethan knew this because both of them called within the week. And Gus came back on a Monday morning 6 weeks, and 2 days after the latter incident. And he walked in, set his coffee on his workbench, and looked around the garage with the systematic attention of a man conducting an inspection. He checked the tool organization. He checked the parts inventory against the log. He looked at the work orders from the past 6 weeks, going through them one by one with a precision that took 45 minutes. He went over the financials with the same attention. Ethan stood nearby and let him look at everything. When Gus finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You moved the socket set. The original position didn't make sense for the workflow," Ethan said. "The way we rotate between the 2 bays, the old spot added 12 steps per job. He tracked it for a week before I moved it." Gus looked at him. "No steps per job. We do an average of 9 jobs a day. And that's over 100 unnecessary steps daily over a year." "You can do the math," Gus said. He looked at the socket set in its new position, picked up a ratchet, turned it over in his hands, set it back. "It's a better spot," he said. He said it the way Gus said everything, flatly, without elaboration. But from Gus, flat was generous. "Thank you," Ethan said. Gus turned back to his bench. "I talked to Marcus while I was out. He know," he mentioned. "He told me the chapter's ready to move forward on the transition structure whenever I say." He didn't turn around. Saying, Ethan went still. "The attorney has a draft," Gus continued. "Gradual buyout over 8 years. structured around your income from the garage itself, not the loan. And the loan stays separate. He picked up a wrench and set it down. And you'd be a co-owner in year 1, majority owner in year 4, full ownership at year 8. Now he turned around. You need to carry the business through any rough patches in that period. I'm not going to bail you out if something goes sideways. No, Ethan said. If you run it into the ground, you lose the investment and you owe the remaining buyout. No, this is a real thing, Ethan. Not a favor. Not a gift. A business transaction, I know, Ethan said for the 3rd time. That's why I want it. Gus looked at him, held the look for a moment, the way he held everything completely, without rush. He nodded once. All right. He turned back to his bench. Call the attorney this week and put the socket set back where I had it. Ethan opened his mouth. I'm joking, Gus said without turning around. Ethan stood there for a second. It was the first joke Gus had made in 18 months. Gus, he said. What, did you just make a joke? No, Gus said. Get back to work. Engineering degree arrived in May. Not dramatically, it came in the mail, a formal envelope with the university seal, which Ethan opened at the kitchen table above the laundromat on a Tuesday evening, after a full day at the garage and 3 hours of studying for his final exam in structural analysis. He sat there with the paper in his hands and looked at his name printed on it and thought about the version of himself that had left school 3 years ago, certain it was temporary, and carrying a weight that turned out to be heavier and longer than anything he'd prepared for. He thought about his father, who was still in Kentucky, and he called every 2 weeks on a Sunday, whose voice had gotten stronger in the past year, not back to what it had been, but moving. But his father had cried when Ethan told him about the garage transition. And he, not dramatically, just gone quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, in a voice that was doing its best, your mother would have called everyone she knew. Ethan had said, I know, Dad. And his father had said, she knew. And she always knew you'd find your way back. He held that sentence in the same place. He held the photograph that was gone, in the place that didn't need an external object to remain real. Put the degree on the kitchen table and took a photograph of it on his phone and sent it to Marcus and Gus and Diane and Gerald and Vincent and his father and Beth and Sarah and Linda. And Marcus replied in 45 seconds, a single word. Yes. Gus replied 4 minutes later. Frame it. Certificates in the office. And Gerald replied, Ethan, man. Congratulations. Beth replied with 4 exclamation points, which from Beth was the equivalent of a standing ovation. His father didn't reply by text. He called. He called, and Ethan answered, and his father talked for 7 minutes straight, which was more than he had talked in any single conversation in 3 years, and Ethan sat at the kitchen table and listened to every word. It was a Thursday in early September, the air just beginning to carry the first suggestion of fall when it happened. Ethan was opening the garage. It was 6:28. He had a coffee in one hand and the key in the other, and his mind was partially on the brake job waiting for him in Bay 1, and partially on a materials specification question from an engineering consulting project he'd picked up through a university contact, one of 3 small consulting jobs he'd taken on in the months since graduation. He heard the motorcycle first, then he turned and saw it pull to the far end of the parking lot, a big touring bike, dark blue, and the rider cut the engine and sat there for a moment before getting off. A man, maybe 40, with the particular hesitation of someone who has arrived somewhere and is not entirely sure what happens next. Ethan watched him look around the lot. Then the man crouched down beside his rear wheel and picked something up from the ground. Ethan went still. The man stood up. He had something in his hand. He turned it over again, and even from this distance, Ethan, see, it was a wallet, slim, dark, and the kind of wallet that falls without making a sound on asphalt. The man looked at the wallet. He looked around the lot. He looked at the wallet again. Ethan set down his coffee. He walked across the lot, not quickly, just steadily. And the man heard him coming and looked up. He was maybe 38, 39, with a face that carried the particular look of someone who has been through enough of life to know that things are rarely simple. He was holding the wallet with both hands in the way people hold things they're not sure what to do with. "And you okay?" Ethan said. The man looked at him. "I found this," he said. And he held up the wallet just now, on the ground. "Okay," Ethan said. "And there's cash in it, a lot, cards. ID." He looked at the wallet again. "And I don't know whose it is." Ethan looked at the man. He looked at his hands steady, despite the uncertainty in his face. And he looked at the way he was still holding it, and still there, and not walking away. Inch was the most important thing. "And you didn't walk away," Ethan said. The man looked at him like that was an odd thing to notice. "And then, no," he said. "Of course not." Ethan felt something move through him. Something started in his chest and expanded in a way he recognized from other moments that had turned out to matter. "Let's find out whose it is," he said. "I'll help you." And the man looked at him for a moment. "You work here?" "And you own it," Ethan said. Something in the way he said it, the simple, direct weight of the word, made the man blink slightly. "And right," he said. He handed the wallet to Ethan. Ethan looked at the ID inside, a woman's name, an address 4 blocks north. And handed the wallet back. "I know where that address is. And you want to return it together, or you want me to take it?" "And together," the man said, without hesitating. Ethan locked the garage door. He called Ray and told him to open up in 20 minutes. He walked 4 blocks north with a stranger who had found a wallet and hadn't walked away. The woman who answered the door, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head. The expression of someone interrupted in the middle of something went through the precise sequence of recognition that Ethan had seen on Marcus's face in the diner 2 years ago. And she saw the wallet. She understood. Her hand went to her mouth. "He dropped it this morning," she said. "I didn't even know." She stopped. She looked at the man with the wallet. "And you found it?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Is everything?" "Everything's there," he said. "I didn't look at much. And just the ID to find the address." She took the wallet. And she stood there for a moment, and the emotion that moved through her face was complicated in the specific way that emotions are when someone unexpected is kind, and you weren't prepared for it. "Thank you," she said. It came out slightly unsteady. "It's yours," the man said simply. "It was always yours." Ethan heard that sentence and felt it land in the specific place where sentences land when they mean more than they say. And he thought about Marcus sitting across from him in Eddie's diner 2 years ago. He thought about, it wasn't mine. He thought, yes. That's it, exactly. They walked back to the garage together. And the man's name, it turned out, was Danny Reeves. He was a mechanic himself, not motorcycles. Automotive, working at a shop across town. He'd been riding through the neighborhood because he had a friend in one of the apartment buildings on Creston, and he'd stopped to check a noise in his rear brake that had been bothering him since last week. "I can look at it," Ethan said, "if you want." Danny looked at him. "You don't have to, I know," Ethan said. "I want to." And he brought that bike in. Ethan looked at the rear brake and found a glazed pad not dangerous yet, but past its useful life. He had a replacement in inventory. He put it in and told Danny what to watch for going forward. And he pulled out his wallet. "Don't," Ethan said. "Ethan, you returned a wallet to a woman who didn't know she'd lost it. And you walked 4 blocks and stood on a stranger's doorstep. And that's worth more than a brake pad. He handed Danny back his key. And ride safe. Danny stood there for a moment with the key in his hand. He had the expression of someone who is being given something they don't know how to hold. And why are you telling me it's worth more? Danny said. And you don't know me. Ethan looked at him. About 2 years ago, he said, I found a wallet in a parking lot. A lot of cash, cards, everything. I'd been homeless for 8 months. And I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. My shoes had a hole in them. Danny was very still. I returned it, Ethan said. Every dollar. And what happened after that? He paused. Changed everything. And not because of the money, because of the choice. He looked at Danny steadily. And you made the same choice this morning. You didn't have to. But you did. And I think you should know that I know what that is. And what it costs, and what it means. Danny looked at him for a long time. And you own this garage, he said finally. From that. Ring. From a chain of things that started with that, Ethan said. And the garage was down the line. But yes, Danny was quiet. He looked at the garage around him, the tools, the bays, the work orders on the board. A place that was clearly and unmistakably functional and real. And someone helped you, Danny said, a man named Marcus Callahan. And about 6 others who didn't need to do what they did. Ethan paused. It's not just the wallet. It's what happens when the right people see who you are at the right moment. And for that to happen, you have to be who you are at the moment nobody's watching. And he nodded slowly. He turned the key over in his fingers. And almost kept walking, he said, this morning. I saw it on the ground, and I almost just kept going. You didn't, Ethan said. No, that's the whole thing, Ethan said. And that's all of it, right there. Danny put the key in his pocket. He shook Ethan's hand, a real handshake, the kind where both people are paying attention. And he walked to his bike. He stopped at the garage entrance and turned back. The man who helped you, he said, Marcus. And does he know that it's still going? He gestured, searching for the word. Moving, Ethan said. Yeah. Does he know it's still moving? Ethan thought about Marcus. He thought about Sunday dinners and phone calls and the thing that wasn't quite a smile. And he thought about what Marcus had told him once, sitting at Hennessy's with 2 cups of coffee, about the specific difference between naive and faithful. I'll tell him, Ethan said. He called Marcus that evening. And Sunday a Thursday, which broke the rhythm, which Marcus noticed immediately. Thursday, Marcus said when he picked up. Something happened today, Ethan said. He told it. But in all of it, Danny, in the wallet, the woman at the door, and the brake pad, and the conversation in the garage. And he told it the way he'd learned to tell things from Marcus, completely, and without amplification, and trusting the story to carry its own weight. And he finished. Marcus was quiet, not the short quiet of someone collecting a response. Any the longer quiet of someone being moved by something and not rushing past that to words. And Marcus, Ethan said. Yeah, Marcus said. His voice was slightly different. And not unsteady, just present in a different way than usual. You need to know something, Ethan said. Tell me. That morning in the parking lot, I had 43 cents. And had a hole in my shoe. I had been awake since 5 because a truck woke me up and I couldn't get back to sleep. He paused. I want you to know what I was carrying when I made that choice. Didn't you understand that it wasn't easy? It cost something. And I want you to know that whatever it cost, I would pay it again. Every time, because of everything that came from it. His voice was even. He had rehearsed none of this. It was just true. You told me I was early. In that first week, when I didn't know if the choice had been worth it. And you told me I was early You were right. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then I have to tell you something. Tell me. 30 years ago, Marcus said, I was 27 years old and I had nothing. Not the way you had nothing, different circumstances, but the same basic fact. No safety net, no direction, no reason to believe it was going to change. He paused. And he found a wallet outside a bar in Reno, $600 in it. And he had $11. Ethan went completely still. He returned it, Marcus said, to a man named Earl Duchamp, who was 63 years old and had been riding bikes since 1965. He found me 3 days later and asked me why. A pause. He told him it wasn't mine. He looked at me for a long time. And then he gave me the number of a mechanic in his chapter who was looking for someone who wasn't afraid to work. His voice was measured, steady in the way Marcus's voice always was, and that something was audible that Ethan had not heard before. His name was Gus Miller. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Ethan sat with it. He thought about Gus. He thought about Earl Duchamp, whose name he had never heard before tonight, who had been dead for 12 years, according to the information that was now assembling itself in his head. He thought about a chain, a real one, with links that connected across decades, each one made at a moment when nobody was watching. Started it, Ethan said. Earl started it, Marcus said. Carried it. Now you're carrying it. Another pause. And today, someone named Danny Reeves picked up a wallet and didn't walk away, and you were there to see it. Ethan stood in his kitchen above the laundromat and felt the full weight, the full lightness of that, simultaneously, the way some things are heavy and free at the same time, depending on how you hold them. And does Gus know, he asked, that you and Earl? Gus knows everything, Marcus said. He's known since before I walked through his door. And Earl called him. Ethan thought about Gus behind the workbench. And the 7 words, the test with the Sportster, the socket set and the joke that wasn't a joke. A man who had been past something real and had spent 40 years deciding who deserved to receive it next. He was waiting for you, Marcus said. He just didn't know your name yet. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table. His engineering degree was framed on the wall in the office at the garage, exactly where Gus had said to put it. His father was in Kentucky, getting stronger. Patricia had given her statement, and Cole Ramirez had not been heard from in 9 months. And Gerald called every few weeks, nothing specific, just to talk. And Ann had started a formal community resource program that now operated out of 3 neighborhood locations. And she had asked Ethan last month if he'd be willing to speak at an orientation for incoming participants, and he had said yes without hesitating. He looked at his hands. The knuckles were beginning to show the same permanent staining that Gus's showed. In the hands of someone who worked on engines, the hands of someone who built things. He thought about a parking lot, 5:47 in the morning. A wallet on the ground beside a dark motorcycle, the city still asleep. And nobody watching. He thought about the question he had asked himself in that moment, the only question that had ever mattered. What kind of person do I want to be when nobody is watching? He knew the answer. He had known it then. He knew it now. And because he had known it, because he had held it, and refused to put it down, even when everything pushed him toward putting it down, a chain that began with a stranger in Reno 30 years ago had found its next link. And that link had found another one in a parking lot on a Thursday morning in September. And that one would find the next, and the next, after that, and cross distances and years that neither Ethan nor Marcus nor Earl Duchamp could have mapped, because that was the nature of the thing. You didn't get to see the whole chain. You only got to be responsible for your link. Picked up the phone. Marcus, he said, tell Linda I'll be there Sunday. And she already knows, Marcus said. She's been assuming you were coming since last week. Ethan smiled. Tell her anyway. I will. And Marcus, he paused. For Reno, for Earl, for all of it. A silence. And then Marcus said, simply and completely, the chain thanks itself. Ethan set the phone down. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, above the laundromat, in the life he had built from a single honest decision, made in the dark. And he understood fully, finally, and without any remaining doubt, that the greatest thing a person could carry was not money, not status, security, but the unbroken knowledge of who they were when no one was watching. And that was the only wealth that compounded across generations. And the only inheritance that cost nothing to receive and everything to keep. And the only gift that grew larger every time it was passed on. And maybe that was what Ethan Brooks carried. That was he would carry for the rest of his life. And it was more than enough. Sign it, the lawyer said, sliding the paper across the table. And sign it, and this all goes away. Jax looked down at the confession. His hand, scarred from 40 years of road and grease and living, didn't shake. His voice didn't either. I didn't steal anything. And nobody cares what you did or didn't do. They care what you look like. And right now, you look exactly like what they need. And Jax pushed the paper back. Then they'll have to prove it. If you've ever stood up for what's right when everything was stacked against you, subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Jax Walker found Emily, the temperature had dropped to 11 degrees below zero. He wasn't supposed to stop. He was riding back from Billings after dropping off a parts order for a buddy's shop, and he had 3 more hours of highway ahead of him. And the wind was cutting through everything, through his jacket, through his gloves, through the kind of cold that makes a man feel like his bones are made of ice. And he wanted to get home, pour a bourbon, and sit next to the wood stove until the feeling came back to his fingers. But something made him slow down when he passed the gas station. It was closed, had been closed for years. Actually, one of those rural Montana casualties, the kind of place that used to sell worms and cigarettes and lottery tickets until the highway got rerouted and the traffic dried up. And the windows were boarded, the pumps were rusted solid. And there was nothing there worth stopping for, except he thought he saw something move. And Jax had been riding motorcycles since he was 16 years old. He had developed, over those decades, a certain instinct, the kind that tells a man when something is wrong, before his eyes have fully processed what he's seeing. It wasn't always right, but it was right enough that he trusted it. He pulled over. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, listening. And the creak of a loose board somewhere on the building. And the distant sound of a semi on the main highway. And then, very quietly, something that sounded like breathing. He climbed off the bike and walked around to the back of the building, and that's when he found her. She was maybe 15, maybe 14, and curled up against the concrete block wall, behind a rusted dumpster, and using a torn plastic bag as a blanket. And she had no coat. She had sneakers with a hole in the left sole. And her lips were a color that scared him. She was shaking so hard he could from 10 feet away. And when she heard his boots on the gravel, she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it. And don't, she said. Her voice was barely a sound. Don't come near me. And Jack stopped where he was. He raised both hands slowly, the way he'd learned to do a long time ago, when something frightened needed to know it was safe. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. That's what they all say. I know it is. He crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. What's your name? She didn't answer. Okay. You don't have to tell me. He kept his voice even. No urgency, no pressure. I'm Jax. Was riding past and I saw you back here. It's 11 below tonight and dropping. If you stay out here, you're not going to make it to morning. I am fine. He looked at her lips, at her shaking hands. At the plastic bag she was gripping like it was the only thing she had left. No, he said gently. You're not. She stared at him with eyes that had already seen too much, the particular kind of wariness that only develops after a person has been lied to enough times that trust becomes a luxury they can't afford. He recognized that look. He'd seen it before, in men coming out of prison, in kids growing up in bad houses, in people who'd learned the hard way that the world didn't always keep its promises. I have a truck, he said. It's at my shop, about 2 miles from here. I can take you somewhere warm, get you some food. I'm not asking for anything in return, and I'm not calling anyone you don't want me to call. He paused. Nobody should have to survive alone in 11 below weather. And the girl studied him for a long moment. Her jaw was clenched so tight from the cold he could see the muscle working in her cheek. And you're one of those bikers, she said finally. Yeah. Hell's Angels. Retired, he said mostly. She almost laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound a person makes when something is too dark to cry about. It's supposed to make me feel better? Probably not, he admitted. Here's the thing. I could have kept riding. Nothing was stopping me. I pulled over because I thought I saw something, and I couldn't live with myself if I rode past a kid freezing to death and didn't at least try. She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the darkness around them, and somewhere down the highway, another truck passed. I'm not going to any shelter, she said. I'm not taking you to a shelter. And I'm not going anywhere with cops. No cops. If you try to do anything, I won't. Another silence. She was weighing him, measuring him the way someone measures a crumbling bridge before they decide whether to cross it. And then, slowly, painfully, she uncurled herself from the wall and stood up on legs that had clearly gone half numb, and she said, in the voice that was trying very hard to sound like it didn't care, "Fine, but I want food first." Her name was Emily. He found that out later. She told him almost nothing the first night, not where she'd come from, not where her parents were, not how long she'd been on her own. She ate the soup he heated up in his kitchen with the focused, grateful intensity of someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. And she sat across from him at the table with her back against the wall and her eyes on the door, ready to run at any second. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He put a blanket on the couch, told her she could lock the guest bathroom from the inside, and went to bed. In the morning, she was still there. That surprised her as much as it surprised him. "He thought you'd be gone," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I was going to leave." It was still cold. "It'll be cold for another 4 months," he said. In Montana, she looked at him over the rim of the cup. "And stay here. I didn't ask you to stay. I just said it's cold." He sat down with his own coffee. "Eat something, then decide." She stayed, not just for that day. Not just for that week. She stayed, because slowly and carefully, and with the particular stubbornness of a man who decided that this mattered, Jax Walker made it possible for her to stay. He learned her story in pieces, never all at once, never by demanding it. Came out over meals, over evenings, in the shop when she watched him work, on a vintage panhead, over late nights when she couldn't sleep and would sit at the kitchen table, and Jax would sit across from her, and neither of them would say much. And mother had died when she was 11. Her father had never been in the picture. She'd been passed between relatives who didn't really want her, and then foster care that wasn't safe, and finally the streets, which were terrible, but at least honest about what they were. She was 15 years old, and she had given up on the idea that anyone in the world was going to look out for her. And Jax didn't announce that he was changing that. He just changed it. He enrolled her in school. He bought her a winter coat that actually fit. He taught her how to check the oil on a bike and how to defend herself if someone grabbed her wrist, and how to balance a checkbook, how to cook 5 things that weren't cereal. And one evening, about 3 months in, she called him dad by accident. It happened in the shop, and she was handing him a wrench and talking about something that happened at school, some drama with a teacher she didn't like. And she said, and so I told him. And he just, Dad, it was the most. And then she stopped. And her face went completely still. Jax set down the wrench. He didn't make it into a moment. He didn't tear up or get dramatic. He just looked at her steadily and said, what happened with the teacher? And she stared at him. And then she finished the story. Neither of them mentioned it directly for another 2 weeks. And then, one morning, over breakfast, Emily said quietly, and without looking up from her plate, is that okay if I call you that? And Jax didn't hesitate. Yeah, it is. That was it. No ceremony, no paperwork, though he eventually handled that too. And just 2 people who had somehow, without planning it, become a family. And those years were the best of his life, and better, in some ways, any than the years with his wife. And Maria, not because he loved Emily more, but because of what he was doing. And because he was watching someone who had been broken slowly put herself back together, and he got to be part of that. And she watched go from a girl who ate like every meal might be her last, to a girl who argued about literature and complained about calculus and had opinions about everything. And watched her laugh, genuinely laugh, the way you only laugh when you finally decided it's safe enough to let your guard down. He worked overtime to make sure she could stay in school without worrying about money. He worked security at Northbridge Solutions 3 nights a week at first, then 4, then 5 when Emily got into the AP classes that put her on track for college scholarships. He never told her how many shifts he was pulling. He just made sure the lights stayed on and the refrigerator was full, and she could focus on what mattered. She won a full scholarship to a law school in Seattle. In the morning, she told him, and she was shaking with excitement and trying not to show it, and Jack sat across from her and listened to the whole story about the envelope and the letter and the financial aid package. And when she was done, he said, I knew you would. And you couldn't have known that. I knew it the night I found you behind that gas station, he said. And you were half frozen, and you were still negotiating. And she laughed, the real laugh, the one that had taken 3 years to earn. At the airport, she didn't cry until the security line. And he didn't cry at all, not in front of her. He held it together until he was back in his truck in the parking garage. And then he sat there for a long time with his hands on the wheel and his eyes closed, and feeling the particular kind of pride and grief that only comes from loving someone well enough to let them go. He drove home to an empty house. He was happy for her. He was. He was also 60 years old and alone again. And the calls came every week at first, then every 2 weeks. And then monthly. Life moved fast for Emily. Law school was brutal. Then the bar exam, then a position at a firm in Seattle that consumed her completely. She was building something. He understood that. He didn't blame her. The silences got longer. His world got smaller. He kept working at Northbridge, not because he needed the money he'd saved enough over the years, but because he needed somewhere to be. He liked the nighttime quiet of the building, the way it felt when everyone had gone home and it was just him and his rounds. He liked the security guys on the evening shift, who sometimes left him coffee in the break room. He liked being useful. He had no idea, that his usefulness was being studied. He had no idea that someone at Northbridge Solutions had spent months watching him, his routine, his access points, his reputation, and had decided that the retired Hells Angels biker working the overnight shift was exactly the kind of person who could disappear into a crime they didn't commit. And Ryan Miller had worked at Northbridge for 6 years. He was 34 years old, inchly, clean-cut, ambitious, and deeply underwater on 3 bad investments he'd kept secret from everyone, including his wife. He worked in the archive department, which meant he had access to the confidential files that Northbridge's biggest clients paid